Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in this world. And welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for this event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap today, lots of great information, but before we get started, we do have some housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you'll be able to access it on demand. We'll be sending out an email after the event that will have a link to the webinar to enable you to listen to it whenever you want. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during the presentation you have a question for our panelists, please just use the GoToWebinar control panel, submit your question, and we'll take probably about 10 minutes or so near the end of the presentation and go through the audience questions. Okay, and with that, I'd like to go ahead and kick off today's event, which is Test Environment Management, a critical requirement for effective CICD. Our speakers today are Steve Hendrick, who's Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates, and Jeff Keyes, Director of Product Marketing at Plutora. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, Steve, I understand you are going to be taking the lead on the conversation, so I'll just turn it over to you now. Let you do your thing.
That's great. Hey, thanks, Charlene. So, the research that we did here was important because it's driving insights into the beliefs, the actions, and the impact that TEM is having on large enterprises. Now, this research that I'm going to show you was both qualitative and it was quantitative. And the quantitative side really demonstrated the economic value that comes from using a TEM tool. So, before I really jump into the research, let's talk about test environment management. So, test environment management, or TEM, is primarily focused on the management of test environments, or TEs. Now, some of the leading products in the test environment management market include AppWide, Innovate, Omnium Lite, and Plutora environments. And the TEM market should not be confused with the dev test environment creation market. That's more focused around the automated instantiation of environments or sandboxes. And vendors in that particular space include vendors like Azure Dev Test Lab or Quality Cloud Shell or ZeroStack. So the question I think that's really important here is why use a commercial TEM product? And I think the reality is that it's because testing is a key aspect of software delivery, you really can't survive without it. So large enterprises manage hundreds and actually sometimes thousands of test environments. So a scalable solution that helps you deal with the management of these environments is absolutely critical. And realistically, using a common off-the-shelf TEM product makes the provisioning of TEs go faster and eliminates wasted developer time. TEs also drive efficiency because TEs can be recycled faster and fewer staff are needed to manage the TE lifecycle. Now, having the correct test environment available when needed also makes testing run more smoothly, and which has a derivative effect of improving application quality. And finally, in the last bullet here, TEM provides complete visibility and manageability across the lifecycle of all test environments. So there's a pretty compelling case for using test environment management. So now, as a teaser, here's a slide that we're going to get to later in the presentation, but it really quantifies some of the values that I just showed you in the last slide. Now, part of what I set out to do in the survey was to evaluate what cost savings could be realized from using a TEM tool. And what caught me by surprise was that test environment management tools deliver cost savings once you get above 15 or so production releases per year, which actually isn't that big a number. And the ROI associated with using a TEM tool is just about immediate. Now, I'll walk you through the analysis about all of this a little bit later in the presentation, but I just wanted to show you what kind of the bottom line results were because, as I said, they really caught me by surprise. Okay, so the project here was to understand the state of test environment management in the large, and do this across large enterprises and evaluate potential cost savings driven by TEM tools. Now, this was a North American survey. It had a sample size of just 159, and it was fielded in June of this year. And the respondents in this particular survey were all IT professionals. They had deep experience in the TEM marketplace and development and dev test management or scheduling. So let me show you two key demographics that you should keep in mind as we go through and talk about this survey. Now, the first is that we only surveyed enterprises that had 5,000 or more employees. And as you can see, more than half the sample had 10,000 employees or more, and the mean number was around 17,000. So we initially just wanted to look at large enterprises because that represents sort of the most complex use case for custom application development, and probably for test environment management as well. Okay, so just large enterprises. Also, our sample had a pretty good representation across every major vertical industry. So I'm just showing you this because I want to make sure that we weren't skewed in direction of financial services or manufacturing and something like that. We had everybody in here. All right, now let's talk about the current IT environment that we found across the enterprises that we surveyed. And slide 9 here shows annual production release volumes. Now, I was a little surprised that no enterprise selected any other responses greater than the 100 to 250 range, as you see, and only 4% of the sample said that test environment management was really part of their DNA. So very few of the enterprises in our sample have mastered TEM. And as you can see, the mean here was 76, and that's a number that you'll see in a lot of the slides I have that calculate out cost savings. All right.
And I know people are going faster, but this is part of the progress that people are making. But that was surprising to you that people weren't having more releases per year than that.
Yeah, well, I think large enterprises, have more of a legacy that they have to deal with, and so from the standpoint of migrating to agile techniques and really trying to exercise DevOps, they have tons to gain from doing this, but at the same time they have tons of challenges that they have to get by in order to be able to get there. So I guess, in some ways I'm not surprised to see the numbers, the way they played out. But at the same time, I think that's going to change pretty rapidly. Because I think, Agile's taking hold everywhere. And so DevOps has a lot of visibility and a lot of benefits associated with it. So, it's just a matter of time. Okay, so production release volume. Let's see. We talked about that. So now let's talk about the distribution of test environments. So most enterprises here were in the 100 to 250 range when it came to the number of test environments. You can see the mean here that I calculated was 188. But the minimum number of test environments was just 50. The maximum was actually 685. So quite a broad distribution, but as you can see, the sweet spot here, as I said, was 100 to 250. Okay, now in this slide, we're actually combining two questions from the survey. The first was, what % of your test environments were created in the public cloud? And what we're showing here is that most enterprises are pretty evenly distributed and spinning up between 10 and 50% of their test environments in the cloud. So it's a good start. But since DevOps is a perfect use case for the cloud, it's actually surprising these numbers aren't higher yet. Now, we had a separate question that we asked, which is, what % of your test environments are created in an automated way? And this also yielded surprisingly low levels of automation, with more than half of the sample auto-creating up to just 30% of their test environments. So, in both cases here, there really is room for improving the automation and the management of test environments. We're sort of at the, we're early in the life cycle, I guess, of test environment management. And I think that's one of the reasons why, we're putting some visibility around this right now.
So if I'm reading these numbers right, sounds like of the, couple hundred environments on average people have, only, 30% are created, up to 40% in that range, and maybe half are in the cloud. So now they've got a problem where some are in the cloud, some are auto-created, and they've got to figure all that out.
Well, that's right. This whole idea of hybrid is ultimately going to rule the day. A lot of these big organizations have a lot of on-premise resources they're still trying to leverage. And with if they haven't automated a lot of what goes on inside of the pipeline, or have tools that automate the instantiation of these kinds of environments, then more often than not, they're going to actually, keep them available for use when they need them, and sort of retire them from active use but never tear them down. Okay, so now let's talk about hardware-software spend on test environments. And you can see here it ranges from 100,000 to 2 million. We've got a mean of about 700,000. And this tracks pretty well with the number of test environments that were reported as well. And I think if you do the math here across the number of test environments, you're looking at about an average of software spend per test environment in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. All right. Now, we'll be asked what TEM products were in use in this slide, and we allowed also for non-commercial TEM tools to be identified as well. In other words, in-house customized solutions. And while the penetration rates for the named tools here have a plus or minus 8% error margin because of the sample size, the dominance of Plutora here is really unmistakable. It just so happens that Plutora was involved in helping sponsor the research that I did here. But so I had no idea going into this what was going to happen with this particular question. And I was actually surprised to see that one particular vendor at this point would have such a dominant penetration rate in this market. But that's just the way it worked out. But what's really interesting in this slide is if you look at the bottom, you see that almost a quarter of the sample did not use a commercial TEM tool. And so I think we need to understand a little bit more about what that means. And so I purposely put a follow-on question in, which we're going to look at now. So this slide shows the other types of tools that are used to manage test environments. And as you can see here, there's a variety of other tool categories. We've got CICD, we've got spreadsheets, we actually have workload automation, and some software configuration management tools. Now these can play, they can play a primary role in supporting test environment management. That would certainly be true for spreadsheets, but they more likely would probably play a supporting role. And of course, the integration between CICD and SCM, if you're looking for ways for automation or dev test environment creation, those integrations are absolutely critical. That's, I think, one of the reasons why you see such high penetration rates here is that CICD, for instance, is sort of one of the most popular tool categories in all of the DevOps pipeline space. Workload automation is not that far behind, and likewise, configuration management also ranks pretty highly up there. So you're gonna see that across enterprises anyway, and the scripting that goes into some of those tools, or the control over production systems, and potentially test environments that WLA can provide, I'm sure all factors into, how these test environments are managed. But the fact that you see spreadsheets at 72% is a little disappointing. That means there's a lot of manual activity still going on. Now, in-house developed tools, I'm really not sure what those look like, but I'm a little bit concerned about what those represent. And you'll see, I think, in some later questions, some of the impact that those in-house developed tools have because of the way the responses play out. And so when we get there, I'll point those out to you. Okay. Now, we also asked the respondents to self-assess regarding their TEM maturity, and we allowed this question to be a multiple response question, although enterprises, when they answered the response at the extreme, did not select any other responses. So remember now, we're only talking to large enterprises, and respondents here have strong TEM and DevOps experience. But this still leaves about 40% of the sample just beginning their TEM journey. So if your enterprise is not yet using a commercial TEM tool, then actually you're in pretty good company. Okay, now this slide shows two questions that we asked about TEM capabilities. The first question was, what capabilities should a TEM tool provide? And the second question was, what TEM capabilities are you using today? Now, the response choices for both questions were absolutely identical. And what's interesting is that we were interested to see how this was going to play out, because every one of the responses that's listed here is actually a capability that a good TEM tool should provide. So this shows that a significant portion of the market does not understand that the bottom 5 capabilities shown in this chart are addressed by TEM tools. And that actually could be partially the in-house solutions here playing through. So these capabilities include, as you can see for the bottom 5, include expediting the handoff from dev to test, verifying and maintaining the health of test environments, test environment chargeback, and integration with the CICD tools, and then finally resolving booking changes or conflicts. So this lack of understanding is in some ways confirmed by the low incidence of use in those same 5 categories. So, but what's, I guess, important to notice here is that the bottom 5 categories, can have a pronounced impact on pipeline performance. So if you're using a commercial TEM tool today, make sure you're getting all of the benefits out of it that you should. And if you're not, think hard about whether any of those bottom 5 capabilities are important to you, and several of them ought to be. And if that's the case, then you probably want to shift over to a commercial TEM tool. Okay, in slide 17 here, we asked TEM tool users to order their top 3 TEM challenges. And so there are 2 ways to look at this data. The first is to look at the #1 ranked responses that have high percentage values, and the second way is to look at those responses with the highest overall number of mentions. So of the #1 ranked responses, an inability to instantiate test environments in an automated way was at the top of the list, and this was followed by a lack of visibility into test environment inventory and availability, and configuration drift at 19%. Now, since these respondents are TEM tool users, it really begs the question, what's going on here? Does this mean that TEM tools are not being used effectively, or does it mean that the coordination between TEM tools and other DevOps tools are creating inconsistencies? So, although the instantiation of test environments currently falls outside the purview of TEM tools, it does need to be on their agenda. And I think, as Jeff will tell you later on, it is actually handled pretty effectively now through integration. But, in my way of thinking, through consolidation eventually in the DevOps pipeline space, it might make sense to have that sort of sandboxing, automation around sandboxing be woven into what goes on with test environment management.
One of the responses there, Steve, is they don't have yet enough value in TEM specific tools. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm sort of surprised to see that. I think in some ways this question represents challenges that they're addressing with TEM tools. So even though they may not have seen enough value yet, maybe that is an issue along with all of these others that are now being addressed by their use of TEM tools. Or at the same time, are they still stumbling and not really mastering yet the capabilities that are provided by TEM tools, and therefore, have yet to see kind of the economic benefits that I'm about to show that can come out of using a TEM tool effectively. So, it's a little bit of a quandary here. I think the data suggests that there's a lot of benefit coming out of these tools. So I guess the fact that value is fairly far down the list means it's less of a challenge also. So that sounds like kind of a double negative, but but anyway, I think that's actually true. The items that toward the bottom of the list are less of a challenge than the ones at the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and then finally objectives regarding the TEM market space. So we use the same format here, and in this slide, the respondents were pretty clear that developing a more automated and scalable approach to TEM and integrating TEM processes with other dev, test, and deploy tools were really the most important objectives, both from a #1 ranking standpoint and also from overall mentions. So these objectives are pretty easily in reach today, and really are kind of core capabilities that help demonstrate the value provided by TEM tools. So I guess my perspective here is that if you've yet to commit to a TEM tool, use this slide and the prior one as crafting your short list of capabilities, as to where you want to see proof of concept. Okay. So now we're going to transition from the qualitative questions that were in the survey into the more quantitative ones, and this is where we're going to see really how the cost benefits and cost savings really shine through. So we started by asking the respondent if they had realized TEM value in 5 specific categories, and for each of those categories where they said they received value, we asked 1 or 2 follow-on questions that would enable us to quantify how much value they really received. So where value was received, we then calculated how much cost savings was actually realized for each respondent, and then we used regression analysis to relate this cost savings data across respondents to either the number of test environments they had or the number of annual production releases that they performed. And by then crafting a relationship, after we did sort of the 5 models here, crafting a relationship between test environments and number of annual production releases, we're able to actually build an overall cost savings model based on number of production releases. And that was the sort of the spoiler I showed you at the very beginning, but we'll show it again here once I walk you through the 5 cost savings. Okay. So the first cost savings model was built around the faster provisioning of test environments. And TEM tools, clearly reduce the time it takes to provision a test environment. And in the survey, it did so from a mean of 3.3 days down to just 1.8 days. That was a pretty significant reduction in time. The relationship that we built here was between test environment provisioning cost savings and the number of test environments. And that gives us a predicted provisioning savings, which you can see in the graph in the upper right-hand corner. And now I also put in the mean number of test environments, which was 188, if you happen to remember. But I also, basically just used the model to identify at different levels of test environments what the predicted savings would be. And so in this case, at the mean of 188 test environments, you're looking at a savings in this particular feature of just over 128,000. So pretty significant. Okay, so Now, we've got the second cost savings model, and that's built around the findings that TEM tools reduce the number of test environments needed. So managing test environments more efficiently means that test environments can be spun up just in time or taken down more quickly. So ultimately, you're going to need fewer test environments. And the cost savings associated with test environment elimination was based on test environment hardware and software spending and the number of test environments that the respondents said were eliminated. So the number of test environments eliminated was actually not all that high across the sample, and with the modest hardware spend, on test environments in this actual sample, the overall savings in the upper right-hand corner is meaningful, but it's not, all that high of set of numbers. So you're gonna save some money here from a reduction in the number of test environments, but it's gonna be minor compared to some of the other some of the savings categories that we're going to talk about.
What's interesting that I wouldn't have expected is the difference between the cost savings that you showed on the prior slide of the faster provisioning. That cost savings is better than the environments eliminated.
Well, yeah, but the reason for that is because you have people cost associated with provisioning. You're saving time, which means that you can keep people more, fully allocated. And so that's a huge win because one of the cost of hardware and software is not all that significant, but the cost of people continues to be a big part of what what goes into the budget.
Yep.
Time is money, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Exactly.
Okay, so the third cost savings model here was built around the reduction in time that it takes to deliver applications into production. Reductions in dev and test time ranged from 1 to 5 weeks, which are pretty significant, and the mean was 1.6 weeks. Now, since developer and QA staff are expensive resources, this cost savings was likely to be pretty significant, and as you can see, it really was.
It's massive.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. But that's because you've got to keep developers busy. You don't want issues with configuration and availability of test environments to get in the way, and that's exactly what this really shows. So the predicted cost savings was related to the number of annual production releases, and the cost benefit here can be seen in the upper right-hand chart, as I mentioned. The mean number of annual production releases was again 76. That translates into a developer dev test cost savings of just over $725,000. So as you can expect here, this idea of savings in dev test time was a major component of the overall cost savings model. And go ahead.
In this model, I remember we had talked about this once before, but it might be interesting to clarify. Was this 1 to 5 weeks of savings? Was that calendar time or was that manpower time?
Let's see. I don't know how specific we were. I think we just said weeks. So we weren't specific in how we asked the question. So I don't. I'm assuming it's manpower weeks.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good point there. I don't think we know. Okay.
And this is, that's a huge savings in the delivery pipeline, to be able to wipe out. If I've got 76 releases a year on average, and I'm wiping out, almost a couple of weeks on each one, that's a fair chunk of time that now I can include more in my throughput. In delivery, and
that's right. Yeah,
and
it's not only that you can get more development work done and more apps out, into circulation, but also think about, from a time to value standpoint, you're generating value from those apps, faster as a result. And we weren't able to capture that and factor that in here, but that's also taking place.
Exactly.
Okay, so the fourth cost savings model was tied to a reduction in TEM staff costs And enterprises here reported that TEM tools enabled TEM staff reductions of between of 1 to 5 headcount with a mean of 2.7. Now, these headcount savings were related to the number of test environments for the enterprise. And the average enterprise in our sample, could expect to see, like, I guess, about 300,000 in cost savings per year because of reduction in headcount. So that's actually pretty significant. The limitation here is that, yes, you're reducing headcount. I guess our feeling was that the test environment management engineers are not quite as pricey as developers. So there is savings here because it's related to staff. But at the same time, that frees up those staff to do other, pressing activities. And that's ultimately a good thing. We're just being more efficient about how we're managing test environments and the staff necessary to have oversight across those activities.
Yeah, and oftentimes those folks will get freed up. Their time will get freed up so that they can focus on pipeline engineering or more automation of the provisioning of the environments themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Good. Okay. So the last cost savings here was tied to how TEM improves the quality of applications developed. Now, better test environments, ones that are configured and provisioned properly, clearly reduce developer time, QA time, and help desk time. And the respondents here reported that between 1 and 7 days were saved per release, with 3.6 days being the mean. So by relating this cost savings back to the number of annual production releases, we're able to predict the dev, test, help desk cost savings at any level of annual production releases. And you can see, of course, the benefits, cost savings benefits in the upper right-hand chart. So the one thing I guess I want to point out here is that this is, from an application quality standpoint, this is sort of a second-order effect, because while TEM doesn't directly improve application quality, but because it is helping accurately configure and make available test environments exactly when you need them, the test environment process can run more smoothly, and the test environment management can run more smoothly, and testing can go more smoothly, and that's ultimately a huge win for organizations. Okay, so after normalizing all of the cost savings to the number of annual production releases, we're now able to predict the TEM cost savings that an enterprise can expect to receive based on their number of production releases. So, for those of you listening to this, if you have a sense of how many production releases your enterprise does per year, you can begin to take, and you're not using TEM tools, or you're using a very manual approach, you can begin to get a sense of what the cost savings can look like here. So, this is pretty clearly the most compelling chart in the deck, because it shows that no matter what your volume of annual production releases is, the payback on your TEM investment will occur pretty fast, like almost immediately. And at the same time, if these cost savings are viewed as cost avoidance, the ROI is also likely to be just 1 or 2 months. So, I see these as the two most important findings of the survey. I don't know offhand what TEM tools cost, but when you look at the sort of the level of savings that are going on here, regardless of what the TEM tool is going to cost on an annual basis, you're going to end up way ahead of the game. I mean, I just can't imagine that it could be any other way.
Were you surprised by these numbers?
Well, I was surprised. I didn't expect to have this kind of cost savings go on, and ultimately the ROI that would likely come out of this. These are massive numbers in my book, and really significant ROI. So, I think what that all just simply shows, which we know from what's going on inside of DevOps and automation across the pipeline, is that there's a lot of different moving parts in the pipeline. There are a lot of opportunities for automation and a lot of need for management. And while this is just one aspect of it, it's a very important one because, you know, if you're going to develop something, you got to test it, and you want to make sure that all the resources necessary to do the testing are available exactly when you need them and are provisioned and configured exactly the right way. And so, you know, while I'm surprised at these numbers, you know, I think when you look at, you know, where the industry is going with, you know, Agile and DevOps and the sort of microservices and containerization and the sort of the faster cycle times that are going to go on when it comes to custom app dev, this just represents a huge opportunity, you know, and it just seems like a no-brainer from the standpoint of what enterprises ought to be doing in this space. Okay, so that's the cost savings summary. And before I hand it over to Jeff to talk a little bit about Plutora, I want to show you 3 more slides that talk about future priorities. So the first thing we did here was we asked the entire sample about TEM priorities for later this year in 2019. And as you can see here, integration between TEM and CICD tools certainly topped the list by a wide margin. That's not a surprise since CICD tools are the most pervasive tool category across all 20 market segments of the DevOps pipeline that I've done analysis on. So if there's integration work to be done here, it really should happen immediately. There's a lot of benefit from addressing this particular issue. And if we remember back to the slides earlier on TEM Challenges, an inability to instantiate test environments in an automated way certainly topped the list. And since CICD activities will often drive TEM events, providing a seamless integration between these two tool categories is certainly critical, as is the abstracted way to automate the instantiation of test environments. Okay, so next we asked about DevOps priorities for later this year and across 2019. And right here at the top of the list was improving the speed of software delivery. And while our quantitative analysis clearly shows that TEM tools improve software delivery time and quality, I suspect that a more rigorous approach to DevOps QA would also see additional TEM speed benefits. So the second priority in this chart, improving the quality and reliability of apps, also points to a more rigorous approach to DevOps being needed. And TEM tools here would drive cost benefits and certainly have shown to support a more rigorous approach to DevOps. But the challenge here is ensuring that TEM tools support a wider variety of DevOps process models and tool categories. So it feels to me like that's you know, if a TEM vendor hasn't done that work, that's critical for them to address. And then last year, we have overall IT priorities for the remainder of 2018 and 2019. And leveraging analytics for better business intelligence and real-time insights topped the list, you know, as you can see here with 79% of respondents. And I think that the story here is as the complexity of IT environments increases, a greater emphasis on machine data and analytics is really needed to drive insights and facilitate effective management. So for TEM tools, this first means instrumenting activities to enable reporting and real-time monitoring. Some of those actually already exist. Although later on, machine learning and pattern matching can help TEM tools predict and remediate conflicts before they occur. So as the IT industry becomes more data-driven, extended integration between TEM and CICD and SEM and testing tools could really help automate more activities that today require some level of human involvement. Okay, so that's it for my slides, and I think Jeff is going to talk briefly now about Plutora environments before we move over to Q&A. So Jeff?
You bet. So I thought I'd just, you know, address all these things of saying, hey, we're Plutora, we're one of the tools that provides test environment management, and more than saying we're one of the tools, we're actually the market leader in this category. I don't hear this being talked about as a category much, and given that the majority of large enterprises have, or the majority of environments in large enterprises are non-virtual, if you will. They're not in the cloud, and the majority are not provisioned in an automated fashion. This is a serious problem. And even for those that are provisioned in an automated fashion, there's still a challenge of knowing where and what those environments are doing. You know, whenever I start the conversation about environment management, I always ask who's managing the environments now. And the first response I get is usually a little bit of a deer in the headlights of, you know, well, gosh, I don't know. There's environments, you know, there's physical environments under somebody's desk. There's a couple machines over, you know, in another environment, another location, and nobody really knows who and where things are. And the challenge with that isn't so much that the machines themselves are bad, but it comes down to the utilization, that when multiple applications go to do an integration together, oftentimes they'll conflict, and no one will know really who that is going to impact. So if an environment goes down, how many projects are delayed, or if one project needs to update infrastructure componentry, like needs a newer version of a Java virtual, you know, a JVM or what have you, what's the impact to the other projects, and how does that roll out? And even for microservices, of knowing what are the dependencies between the different microservices, it creates problems. Plutora test environment management is a traditional TEM type tool. It's targeted towards a set of environment managers that will handle the intake requests. In essence, as an environment management group, you can offer a self-service environment, a self-service portal, if you will, to the development teams, where they can come request an environment out of a catalog of offerings that you've got. These are technical specs and configurations and so forth. Those things all have to still get, you know, provisioned up and allocated somewhere. That catalog then gets owned by the test environment managers. The environment managers then can arbitrate the request, assuming there's no conflicts. You know, it's just approved and it's there. All the communication just is handled. The configuration and the allocation is all just part of the tool, and the communication that goes out to the end users is all taken off of the plate of whoever's managing the environments. It puts the environment managers out of the job of having to manage the communication and, you know, a negotiation of different environments to keep track of who's doing what, into it's all centralized in a tool. It's complete elimination of the spreadsheet. And the next step that it enables is a harness for the provisioning, to integrate at whatever level you need, with automation tools to provision those environments. It does, you know, for most people, you're in the transition of creating more and more environments and creating them in a more and more automated fashion. The challenge with most CI pipelines is that unless you're 100% automated, well, you can't use it at all. Well, that's not really a barrier here. You can actually reach out, use these environments now at whatever level of automation you are, and incorporate, you know, more and more automation as you go. The key question is, well, which types of configurations, which catalog items do you need to automate more? Well, that's where you can look at your demand and see what's going to be utilized, so you know how to focus your automation efforts for their provisioning. And of course, the environment managers can then manage utilization. They can even handle scenarios of chargeback, where as a centralized center of excellence, they can offer this as a service with associated chargebacks. Now, Plutora Environments has two other key parts in that. It has a tool integration out to a wide variety of tools in the development ecosystem, not the least of which is the integration into the cloud environment, so you can provision cloud-based configurations. You can integrate into your CI, as well as integrate into ServiceNow Remedy on the operations side to both directions, from requests from bookings or to activities where you're pulling in third parties to actually do the work in the case that it's manual and handled by a third party. Benefit is this, is just it gives you one environment where you can handle, one spot where you handle the entirety of your environment management work. If you want to jump to the next slide, I'll show you one example what this looks like in practice when you've got a number of staging environments, if you will, where in this case it's showing a pipeline related to a specific set of projects as they're moving through the delivery pipeline. And those things are going to go from build to a system integration to integration tests where longer running tests are running. Maybe there's a user acceptance test phase where there's a stage running there, might be a demo, even a staging or pre-production where things are rolling out. And different versions of different applications are rolling onto each of these where they get packaged together, then promoted into a production environment. What's cool here is that you can see the flow of the changes as they go and hop from environment to environment as they get laid out. You can integrate into that pipeline different kinds of tests. So you might have just unit tests running on your build environment. That's great. But when you get to integration or user acceptance, you might have a whole lot of different other, from a smoke test set of runs. And the integration, you can have longer running. Not uncommon to have a 24-hour set of long-running unit tests that are running from load to different types of transactions. Even putting these things all together in that provisioning step that you can validate the environment to a whole deeper degree. This is an actual screenshot from Plutora, our test environment management functionality, that as you drill into each of these things, you can drill into one of the projects and see the actual changes coming from Git or whatever your source control management is, and relate that back to the requirements changes, assuming, for example, you're using Jira, for example. And if you see that there's a newer code change that hasn't been promoted to your environment as a test or release manager, you can actually click initiate the build that actually rolls those changes into your environment so you can keep going. If you have a Jenkins job, for example, that is a set of tests, you can run those again against the new code. Basically gives you kind of control without having to be in each of the development tools. You can sit on top of it either from a QA or a release manager perspective and be able to interact with the environments that are there. The best part about this is that it gives you a level of confidence of the application delivery. As the code matures going from left to right, you can have a higher degree of confidence as it gets closer to production that it actually ought to be going into production and that the features are actually there. And then you can get feedback from the test teams and from the end users that are doing things. There really isn't a good reason why to not use a test environment management tool. The numbers show it from an analysis and a cost savings benefit. And frankly, at the end of the day, we're all here to go faster. We're all here to deliver higher quality software at a higher rate of speed and a higher velocity. This is the way to, get us moving in that direction. And it's, frankly, just a really simple solution. Just manage the environments, get them out of spreadsheets and manually run process and start to automate them. You don't have to be 100% automated. You can get started using this today, and then you'll be more directed on where you should automate next. As you saw from the data, it's just a short period of time in the magnitude of months before you'll get a return on investment from implementing a tool like this. Frankly, in terms of transforming your IT, I don't know why anyone would not go down this path sooner than later. So with that, that's Plutora test environment management is just one component of the Plutora platform, which has other functionality for release orchestration, deployment orchestration, value stream mapping and management. And all of this data then rolls up into a common analytics engine, so you can actually look at historical demand and start to predict future capacity and see where you're going next. The combination of these things is what you need to run your business of IT. So that's the Patera environment. We can kind of go on and move on to the next step of questions.
Excellent. All right, guys, we've gotten some good questions in so far. I do want to let the audience know, though, that there is plenty of time. If you have a question for either Steve or Jeff, just go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel, submit your question, and we'll go ahead and get started with the first one here. What does Plutora integrate with? Jeff?
That's a great question. Plutora integrates with a whole number of tools. We have actually a generic integration layer. So if you've got it out there, we can integrate to it. That's the first thing. So we have APIs, we have an integration hub, we can enable webhooks, we can do file-based. Because we've been dealing, the majority of our customers are large enterprises. We're well versed in the world of the security concerns and the rest of that comes, and we've, if there's a model out there that you need to integrate with. The primary areas where our environment management integrates to are first into the the ITSM tools. So we'll get a load in of the different physical environments and the physical servers and so forth, and we map that into a CMDB-like structure of projects and environments as a grouping of different kinds of applications and projects and so forth as they relate together. We'll keep track of the dependencies that are there as well. The second big area of integration comes in the form of the CI servers, and so that we can integrate in that, so we can help you walk that through the process like you've seen, like I showed in the CD pipeline. And we also have integration into source control management, as well as the requirements management and so forth. And then obviously there's provisioning and deployment and the operations side. I mean, all of the above is kind of where these things connect into.
So hey Jeff, let me just ask you one thing here. So one of the big challenges here was the automated instantiation of test environments. Mm-hmm. So sure, that gets easier with the cloud, but the reality is that a lot of this is going to happen in an automatic way. And you look at some of those tools for creating sandboxes, or you look at SCM tools, configuration management stuff. All of those different tool categories can provide ways to sort of automate how you can create an environment. You hadn't mentioned those before, but I'm assuming that Plutora integrates in nicely with those guys as well.
Absolutely. I should have mentioned that. I mentioned it at a high level, but from provisioning and configuration and deployment, those being the primary things. If you think about a traditional test environment stack, I mean, you've got to provision your physical infrastructure, you've got to configure that so you get your core components down, you've got to get a build there. We also have integrations with test environment data, so you can lay down actual data there as well, and then lay down the smoke test, integration test, kind of verify the environment's okay, and run all that as a stack if you want to do it as an automated fashion. Or if it's not automated, fine, you can do a bunch of it manually. And so that's the cool part about this, is you can kind of mix and match wherever it makes sense.
All right, great. Next question. In your view, what components make up a test environment?
I can take that one, Steve, and you can
sure,
add to it. So all of the above. There's projects. So the test environment itself is a combination of physical components and the configurations that sit on top of it. So database, yes. Each company that we've worked with has dealt with it in a slightly different environment, or a slightly different way. If it's componentry like the web server and Java environment, yeah, that's part of it. Is it I need to add as part of my catalog particular projects and applications? Yes, that's part of it. That's what makes it really cool. We have other customers too, where one customer of ours is a multinational utility company, and so they've got meter readers, that have firmware on them, and so they had to create a whole series of environments so they could test against their various types of in-home and meters that they were reading, and so they use Plutora to keep track of those and schedule those out so they can verify builds against those things as well. So IoT then becomes yet another thing that is you need to be able to verify against.
All right. Great. Steve, did you want to add anything onto it?
No, that was pretty good. I mean, I think Jeff did a great job. So let's go forward.
All right, great. Next question, how does TEM, test environment, apply to mainframe applications?
Well,
Stumper.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think it's the same. In fact, especially in the mainframe world, I mean, those are not cheap resources. And when you think about scheduling and provisioning capacity on the mainframe, you better make sure that you've got things set up, because there's more than just, you know, I need to use the mainframe. Well, you need more than that. You need to make sure that you know what aspect of it you're using, what kind of configuration is going to go there, and that almost certainly will require some human manual intervention, and so absolutely applies in the mainframe world.
Yeah, I think also when you're getting ready for production releases, you're going to want to be leveraging mainframe resources so that you've got parity with what it's going to look like when you go into production. So I think when you're doing that, it becomes absolutely critical that you have the highest levels of efficiency and accuracy around how you're leveraging those resources. And I think the best way to get that is going to be through a TEM type tool.
All right, great. We're about 4 minutes to the top of the hour, so I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. There are a lot of tools for CICD on the market. It is hard to know all of them. What do you suggest to go about selecting the best ones from a testing perspective? I guess considerations there. Yeah.
That's a really, really good question, because there are a ton of tools out there. I think the first thing to remember is that, test environments, at least half of the environments at least half of the physical infrastructure that you're going to be dealing with exists on premise. And, assuming following the data, then it looks like roughly a third or a quarter is living in the cloud, and some of that physical infrastructure will be virtualized, some won't. There's going to be all sorts of things you've got to figure out and how you're going to improve that. Well, you can't really improve what you can't see. The point of test environment management is to give you visibility into your infrastructure so that you can actually have a chance to manage and improve it. From there, the specific tools to select really depends upon, one, where your current pain points, which you won't know until you start looking at demand. And then 2, some of the architectural choices and other technology choices you've used. That's a great question to connect up with us, and we can kind of help you through that process, with the first step being, frankly, to take an inventory of your test environments that are out there, match that with the technology, and we can help you, help guide that to the, the provisioning technology, the configuration management technology that makes sense for you, and all across that. And we've got great solution consultants that can help walk you through that world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because there's a lot of moving parts here, and the reality is that while your objective may be to pick what is the best CICD tool for my enterprise, the reality is that to do that sort of most effectively, you want to do it in conjunction with looking at also looking at those tools that are going to have to integrate in very closely with whatever the CICD tool of choice is going to be, and make sure that you collectively can drive the greatest value from the portfolio of tools that you're going to be that will be put to bear on building and testing your custom apps.
Yeah, one more point on that. This is a common point that I make all the time. Traditional, IT is trying to, okay, I want to go out and kick off a research project to figure out the one tool that our entire enterprise is going to go standardize on, and that's going to be the tool that's going to be our, this is the end all. Our experience has been that doesn't usually yield a lot of fruit. To stop worrying about individual development tools and focus more on a management environment that you can put in place as a harness around each individual team. Give them the capability of being autonomous in true lean fashion, but yet give them some guardrails so that you can still offer insights and visibility and transparency in what they're doing. When we talk about, from the Plutora perspective, test environment management, that's the point. We don't want to dictate what's out there. We want to integrate to everything. In fact, in every environment we're in, there's such a myriad of tools we integrate to. That's the value we provide. We don't care. Let teams make some of their own decisions, and you put the guardrails up.
Okay, with that, we are at the top of the hour, so we need to close up questions now. I want to thank everybody who did submit a question, and if we didn't get to it, just know that that Steve and Jeff will both be receiving a copy of the questions, so I'm sure one or both of them will be able to follow up with you offline. Also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, you will be able to listen to the webinar on demand. Just check your email soon. We'll be sending out a link to the email or to the webinar that you'll be able to access it. It will also be living on the DevOps.com website under the webinars tab, so feel free to go check it out there as well. Steve Hendrick, Jeff Keyes, thank you so much, both of you, for being a part of today's webinar. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
Great. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon signing off. Have a great day, everybody.